The Romans heated entire marble palaces using zero electricity, zero gas, and zero moving parts. So why did we abandon this method? The answer reveals something disturbing about modern construction. 2,000 years ago, Romans figured out how to heat buildings without electricity, without gas lines, and without thermostats. Their solution? Set a fire underneath the floor and let physics do the rest. The hypocaust literally means fire beneath in Greek. And that's not poetry. That's exactly what it was. Here's how it worked. Builders constructed a hollow space under the floor, about 2 feet high. They stacked bricks into little pillars called pili, then laid thick stone tiles on top, light a furnace on one end, and hot air rushes through that crawl space, heating everything above it. Simple, right? But here's where it gets ridiculous. A single wood-burning furnace, called a prefurnium, could heat an entire Roman bathhouse. We're talking 10,000 square feet, one fire, no ductwork, no blower motors, just hot air doing what hot air does. The warm rooms stayed around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The hot rooms, up to 130, barefoot, on stone floors, in winter. Meanwhile, I can barely keep my bedroom above 68 without my energy bill looking like a car payment. Romans weren't just heating buildings. They were engineering comfort on a scale that wouldn't be matched for over a millennium. And once wealthy citizens saw what the public baths had, they wanted it at home. By 100 BC, private hypocausts became the ultimate status symbol. Forget marble columns. If your floors weren't heated, you weren't anybody. The wild part? This technology spread across the entire empire, from North Africa to northern England, from Spain to Syria. One heating concept adapted to every climate Rome touched, and it worked really, really well. Too well, actually, because the hypocaust's success created problems the Romans never saw coming. Entire forests disappeared. Slaves worked around the clock. And when the empire eventually collapsed, this brilliant system vanished almost overnight. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand why stone floors became the world's first radiators, and why that single insight made everything else possible. Here's the thing about Roman engineering that drives modern architects crazy. They figured out thermal mass 2,000 years before we gave it a fancy name. Thermal mass is simple. Dense materials like stone and concrete absorb heat slowly, but they also release it slowly. So a thick floor soaks up warmth for hours, then radiates that warmth back for hours more. The Romans didn't have thermodynamics textbooks. They just noticed something. Their stone floors stayed warm long after the fire died down, and being Romans, they exploited that discovery ruthlessly. A 2-foot thick concrete floor could hold enough heat to keep a room warm for 12 hours. 12 hours! That's an entire night of sleep without anyone feeding the furnace. Now compare that to modern forced air heating. Your furnace kicks on, blasts hot air. The room heats up fast. Then it clicks off. The room cools down, clicks on again, cools down again. You're basically living inside a temperature yo-yo. Roman hypocausts didn't work that way. The heat was constant, even. No drafts blowing your papyrus scrolls across the room. No hot spots by the vent and cold spots by the window. Just steady warmth rising up from below. And the floor temperature itself? Genius. Romans kept it around 85 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Warm enough to feel cozy walking barefoot. Cool enough that you wouldn't burn yourself. My grandfather used to say the best inventions are the ones you don't notice working. That's exactly what hypocaust floors delivered. Background comfort. Makes sense, right? Heat rises. So heating from the floor means warming the people first, then the air, then finally the ceiling. Modern systems do it backwards. They pump hot air toward the ceiling where nobody lives, then hope some trickles down to human height. Romans were walking on heated floors in 100 BC. Americans didn't even invent a basic thermostat until 1883. That's nearly 2,000 years of technological gap, but warm floors were only part of the system. The real engineering magic, it happened inside the walls. And that's where things get seriously clever. Here's the thing, though. Romans weren't satisfied with just warm floors. They wanted more. So they ran hollow clay tubes called tubuli inside the walls themselves. These rectangular ceramic boxes, roughly 4 by 8 inches each, stacked vertically from floor to ceiling. Then workers plastered right over them, completely invisible. Sneaky? Absolutely. Genius? Even more so. The hot exhaust gases that already heated the floor, Instead of escaping immediately, they got a second job. They traveled up through these wall channels, turning entire rooms into giant radiators, floor to ceiling warmth, simultaneous, no cold corners, no frozen spots near windows where you'd rather die than stand. And here's what kills me. No pumps, no fans, nothing mechanical whatsoever. Hot air rises naturally. Everyone knows that. But Romans actually used this basic physics principle to create self-circulating heat. The system literally ran itself once the fire got going. Meanwhile, my smart thermostat needs a software update every 3 weeks. Makes sense, right? The tubuli created a continuous pathway. Hot gases entered under the floor, warmed everything below, then rose through the walls, warming everything around. By the time exhaust finally escaped through the roof, it had given up almost every bit of usable heat. Modern baseboard heaters, they warm one strip along the wall while your ceiling hoards all the heat like a selfish relative at Thanksgiving dinner. But Roman rooms stayed evenly warm everywhere. Now get this, archaeologists digging at Bath, England found tubuli still perfectly intact after 1,900 years. The ceramic boxes hadn't crumbled. The channels hadn't collapsed. Nearly 2 millennia of British weather, and these things just sat there waiting to be discovered. My bathroom tiles cracked after 18 months. The durability wasn't accidental either. Romans fired these ceramics at specific temperatures to maximize strength. They understood material science before we had a name for it. So floors heated from below, walls heated from within. The entire room became one unified heating element. But all this heat had to come from somewhere. And that somewhere? That's where things got dark, literally. Here's the thing about Roman luxury. Someone always paid for it. The Prefernium sat outside or below the main building. Smart design, actually. You keep the fire, smoke, and ash away from the people enjoying the heat. But that furnace didn't feed itself. Enter the fornicatores, slaves, working in shifts around the clock during winter months, shoveling wood into flames that never stopped burning, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months. A large bathhouse, 10 tons of wood, every single day. That's roughly 2 acres of forest disappearing every week just to keep Romans comfortable in their towels. My heating bill seems pretty reasonable now. And these furnace workers weren't just mindlessly tossing logs into fire. They were trained technicians. The furnace opening was carefully sized to control airflow, acting like a primitive damper. Too much air and you waste fuel. Too little and the fire chokes. But the real skill? Reading smoke. White smoke meant the wood was too wet. Black smoke meant the fuel mixture was too rich. Gray smoke? Perfect combustion. These guys became experts at something most people today couldn't identify if their lives depended on it. The weird part is how modern this separation concept actually was. Heat source in one location, living space in another, connected by controlled pathways. That's exactly how your building's boiler room works right now. Romans figured it out when my ancestors were still painting themselves blue. Now maintaining consistent temperatures across thousands of square feet without a single gauge or thermostat, that took experience. Generations of knowledge passed down from one furnace worker to the next. The Prefernium wasn't just a fire pit. It was a precision instrument operated by people history barely remembers. Makes you think differently about who really powered the Roman Empire. Senators got the statues, generals got the triumphs, but some unnamed slave watching smoke color at 3 in the morning? He kept civilization warm. All that heat had to go somewhere after it left the floors and walls. And how Romans handled that exhaust? That's where the real engineering genius shows up. The Romans weren't stupid. They knew hot air rises and escapes. So why didn't their hypocausts just shoot all that expensive heat straight out the roof? Because they made the exhaust work overtime before leaving. Here's the trick. The vents on the roof, basically early chimneys, were deliberately narrow. Not wide like a fireplace flue, skinny. This slowed the hot gases down, giving them more time to transfer heat into the walls on the way up. But that's only half of it. The real genius was the journey itself. Hot air didn't go straight from furnace to sky. Nope. It traveled under the entire floor first, then up through those wall tubes we talked about. Then, finally, out the roof. That's a long, winding path. And every foot of that path was another chance to steal heat from the exhaust before it escaped. Modern furnaces, They lose 20 to 40% of their heat straight up the chimney. That's like paying for a pizza and throwing away half the slices. Roman hypocausts lost only 10 to 15%. They were squeezing almost 90% efficiency out of a wood fire 2,000 years ago. And it gets better. Some fancy villas had adjustable covers over their roof vents, bronze or ceramic caps that could be opened wide during mild weather or closed down tight when temperatures dropped. Basically, a manual thermostat in the 1st century. Now here's the part that made me laugh when I first learned it. The exhaust system created something called negative pressure. As hot gases rose and exited through the roof, they pulled fresh air into the furnace automatically. No bellows needed, no slaves pumping air. Once you got the fire going, the system literally breathed on its own. It's like the Romans built a self-sustaining heating machine using nothing but physics and clay pipes. Meanwhile, medieval Europeans were sitting in smoky halls, breathing soot, and wondering why their eyes burned. Speaking of medieval failures, the Romans did something even more clever with bathhouses. One single fire heating 3 completely different rooms at 3 different temperatures. How? The answer is almost embarrassingly simple. Here's the thing about Roman engineers. They were lazy, not stupid lazy, smart lazy, the kind of lazy where you refuse to build 3 separate furnaces when one will do the job. Roman bathhouses had 3 rooms at 3 different temperatures. The caldarium was scorching hot. The tepidarium was comfortably warm. The frigidarium stayed cool. And somehow, a single fire handled all of it. How? Distance. The hottest room sat directly over the furnace, like right on top of it. The warm room was positioned a bit farther away. And the cold room? Farthest from the flames. No complicated valves, no separate heating zones, just basic geometry doing all the heavy lifting. It's like sitting around a campfire. The person hugging the flames is sweating. The person 10 feet back is comfortable. The person by the cooler is wondering why they forgot their jacket. Same principle, the Romans just built it into their architecture permanently. Now here's the part that still impresses me. Doctors today confirm that moving through gradually changing temperatures is actually healthier for your heart. Going from freezing cold to blazing hot shocks your system. But transitioning slowly, your body adjusts without strain. Romans figured this out 2,000 years before we had cardiologists writing research papers about it. The caldarium floor got so hot that bathers needed special wooden sandals called scolpinea. Walking barefoot meant burned feet. These weren't optional fashion accessories. They were survival gear for your souls. And get this, American homes didn't have real zoned heating until the 1970s. That's when forced air systems finally got multiple thermostats so different rooms could be different temperatures. The Romans had already solved this problem before the calendar flipped to AD. 1 fire, 3 temperatures, 0 electricity, 0 pumps, 0 computers calculating optimal heat distribution. Sometimes the simplest solution really is the smartest one, but running a system this effective came with a cost, a massive one, and it wasn't money. It was something Rome couldn't manufacture or import, something that would change entire landscapes forever. Here's the thing nobody tells you about Roman engineering. It had a dark side. All those cozy bathhouses, those heated villas where senators walked around in togas while snow fell outside, they ate forests alive. And I mean ate them. A single large bathhouse burned through 10 tons of wood every single day. That's not a typo. 10 tons. Daily. Do the math on that, and you're looking at roughly 2 acres of forest disappearing every week just to keep one building warm. Now multiply that by hundreds of bathhouses across the empire. Then add thousands of private homes with hypocausts. Then throw in military camps along every frontier. Britain got hit especially hard. Before the Romans showed up, the island was basically one giant forest. After 4 centuries of occupation, huge swaths were gone. Garrison bathhouses alone consumed staggering amounts of timber. Every legion wanted their heated baths. Every commander demanded a warm house. The trees paid the price. But here's where Romans got clever. When wood ran out, they adapted. Archaeological digs in Britain have found coal residue dating back to the 2nd century AD. That's right, Romans were burning coal almost 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution made it famous. Necessity really is the mother of invention. And they didn't stop there. Some regions developed coppicing. It's a forestry technique where you cut trees down but leave the roots intact. The stumps regrow into new harvestable wood within 10 to 15 years. Basically, Romans accidentally invented sustainable forestry because they were running out of fuel to heat their bathtubs. A modest private villa needed about 2 to 3 cords of wood per winter. That's 275 cubic feet of lumber just to keep one family comfortable. The fuel demands were absolutely relentless, so the hypocaust created one of history's first energy crises. Forests shrank, landscapes changed, entire regions were reshaped by Rome's addiction to warm floors. But something strange happened as the empire expanded northward. The system actually worked better in places Rome never intended to conquer. Here's the thing most people miss about Roman engineering. The hypocaust wasn't invented for Rome. It was perfected everywhere else. Rome itself barely needed it. Mediterranean winters are mild. A brazier and a wool cloak handled most cold snaps. But Roman soldiers stationed in Britain, Germany, Gaul, those guys weren't putting up with frostbite for the glory of the empire. So the hypocaust spread fastest along Rome's northern frontiers. Makes sense, right? The colder the posting, the faster the heating technology arrived. Take Hadrian's Wall, northern England. Temperatures dropping below freezing. Every single commander's house had hypocaust heating. Every bathhouse, too. This wasn't luxury. This was survival infrastructure. You try keeping a garrison combat ready when their toes are turning black. And Roman engineers didn't just copy the Italian blueprints, they adapted. In Germany, they dug deeper underfloor channels, wider too. More hot air volume meant more heat output for those brutal continental winters. These weren't lazy contractors. They understood that a system designed for mild Roman winters needed serious modifications for a German January. The archaeological evidence is pretty clear on this. Soldiers stationed in cold territories considered heated barracks a non-negotiable military requirement. Not a perk, not a bonus, a requirement. Try telling a legionnaire who just spent 8 hours on wall duty that the heating budget got cut. Good luck with that mutiny. The city of Trier in modern Germany had over 20 major buildings with hypocausts by 300 AD. 20 in a provincial city. Meanwhile, back in Rome, plenty of wealthy citizens still used portable braziers like it was the Bronze Age. I find this genuinely funny. Romans proved that a Mediterranean heating invention worked perfectly 1,500 miles north in snow and ice. The guys who invented it for their bathhouses barely used it at home. The guys freezing on the frontier made it standard equipment. But here's where the story gets weird. This incredible system that worked in the coldest climates, it didn't survive the fall of Rome. Not because it stopped working. The reason it disappeared will probably make you angry. Here's the frustrating part. The hypocaust didn't die because it stopped working. It died because Rome did. When the Western Empire collapsed around 476 AD, nobody suddenly forgot how to stack bricks. The knowledge was there. The ruins were everywhere. But hypocausts needed 3 things that vanished almost overnight: skilled masons who understood the engineering, reliable fuel supply chains, and cheap labor to keep fires burning around the clock. Medieval Europe had none of that. So what replaced this genius heating system? Fireplaces. Single-room hearths that shot 80% of their heat straight up the chimney. I'm not exaggerating. Modern tests show medieval fireplaces were basically decorative bonfires with terrible efficiency. And here's what kills me. Monasteries and castles, the buildings that needed heating most, completely abandoned radiant floors. Instead, they hung tapestries on stone walls and huddled around smoky central fires. The solution was literally under their feet. In ruins. Right there. Some monks even lived in repurposed Roman villas. They walked over collapsed hypocaust floors every single day without understanding what they were standing on. That's like finding a working car and using it as a chicken coop. The engineering schools that trained Roman builders? Gone. The centralized infrastructure that moved wood efficiently across provinces? Collapsed. Within a few generations, hypocaust construction became a lost art. People saw the hollow floors and ruins and probably thought the Romans were just weird. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call Byzantine, kept using hypocausts for another 1,000 years. Constantinople had heated bathhouses until the Ottoman conquest in 1453. Same technology, same efficiency. Nobody in Western Europe bothered to ask their Eastern neighbors how it worked. It took until the 1900s before Europeans seriously reinvented radiant floor heating. 1,500 years of cold feet because nobody wrote down the instructions. But here's what makes this story even stranger. While medieval lords froze in their castles, the Roman design was about to get a second life in the most unexpected way. Modern engineers didn't just rediscover it, they improved it. So here's the part where this actually matters to you. Modern radiant floor systems achieve 25 to 30% better energy efficiency than forced air. Why? Same reason the Romans figured out. Heat rises from below instead of blowing uselessly toward your ceiling where you definitely don't live. Got a concrete slab home? You're sitting on a gold mine. Hydronic radiant systems pump hot water through embedded tubes, exactly like Roman tubulae, except plastic instead of clay. Same concept, 2,000 years later. Now, the honest truth, installing radiant heat under tile or stone costs more upfront. Nobody's going to pretend otherwise. But here's the math that matters. 15 to 20% lower heating bills annually in cold climates. Over 10 years, that initial investment starts looking pretty smart. Over 20 years, you're basically printing money while your neighbors feed their furnaces. But the real genius the Romans understood, thermal mass storage. This works beautifully with modern heat pumps. Run cheap overnight electricity to heat your concrete slab. The floor stores it, then releases warmth during expensive peak hours when utility companies charge you 3 times as much. You're arbitraging your electric bill using 2,000-year-old physics. My accountant would be impressed if he understood what arbitrage meant, and for the truly adventurous. Some off-grid homeowners have built literal wood-fired hypocausts using rocket mass heaters. These achieve 90% combustion efficiency. That's not a typo. 90%. Your grandfather's fireplace lost 80% up the chimney. These systems lose 10. The fundamental insight hasn't changed since toga parties were trending. Heating the floor heats the people. Heating the ceiling heats the ceiling, which, last time I checked, nobody sleeps on. Engineers keep rediscovering this every few decades like it's some breakthrough innovation. Meanwhile, Roman bathhouse ruins have been sitting there the whole time, basically holding up a sign that says, "We told you so." 2,000 years of technology later, and the best heating advice remains exactly what some Roman engineer figured out while building a spa. Sometimes the ancients really did know better.